Okay guys, so today we're going to look at the epic, which is a literary genre. The epic is pretty universal throughout all the cultures that we are found examples of this from. The Roman and Greek epics share very many similarities, and we're going to take a look at what they are today. The first similarity that we see in epics is the concept of in media res, which literally means in the middle of things. The story is going to begin in the middle of the story. We're not going to start out in the beginning. It's sort of like a breaking news type action. In the Iliad, we actually begin in the middle of the Trojan War, not in the beginning. And with the Aeneid, the same thing. We don't begin with the Trojan War. Instead, we begin after the war when Aeneas is escaping. And we're going to be in the middle of a storm at this point. So book 1 actually takes place after the war. But then at some point we're going to have to flash back to figure out why our heroes in the predicament that they're in. And after our in media res, we're going to flash back in book 2 to the Trojan War and the downfall. In fact, Virgil's flashback to the Trojan War actually starts towards the end of the Trojan War, not in the beginning. In addition, we often see an invocation of a muse or a god. Virgil and Homer both call upon the muse to help inspire them to read their story. We're also going to see our heroes and other characters pray to the gods throughout the poem. Aeneas himself is quite fond of praying upon the gods, especially when he is in bad circumstances. If we look at these two examples, these two come from Homer. Muse, tell me the cause, so inspire me to tell my story. Sing, goddess, sing of the rage of Achilles. And again, the goddess here is the muse. This line here is the first line of the Iliad. In the Aeneid, we're going to see that famous line, I sing of arms in the man, and then a few lines later, we're actually going to have Virgil call upon the muse. We're also going to see catalogues, not something that you would chop from. These catalogues instead are lists of heroes or historical figures that are encountered through the story. Virgil uses it mainly to discuss these historical figures. So when we go to the underworld, we're going to start to count, oh, here's this guy, and here's that guy, and here's this guy who spawned from this guy, and then he had this kid and that kid, and so forth. So it's just going to be a list and a list of heroes. He's also going to talk at some point about his ships and saying the ship that carried this man and that man and this man and that man. Most of the time, it's just a long list of names. Divine machinery, we are going to see quite a bit of intervention from the gods. Homer calls upon the gods. The Aeneid is particularly fond of calling upon the gods and their intervention. We're going to even see in one of the first couple lines of the book, we're going to say what so greatly caused the wrath in this goddess, talking about Juno. But this will not be a story without the intervention of the gods, particularly Venus and Juno, and also Jupiter, even though he really doesn't do too much, except to become a mediator. Epithets. An epithet is a descriptive phrase which is going to be continuously used with a hero, a place, a character, and it's normally repeated. In the Aeneid, we're going to come across these epithets as pious Aeneas, miserrima Dido, which is our most miserable Dido. Some of the ones that Homer often used were rosy, tipped-fingered Dawn, gray-eyed Athena, swift-footed Achilles. Really, they use this description over and over again to make sure that we're understanding who the person is and also to fit our meter. We're going to see a lot of similes, where we've got our comparison between two objects using a like or an as. And we're also going to have a descent into the underworld. This is big. This is when our hero changes, and this happens in most epics. Aeneas will descend in the underworld around book 6, as most heroes in epic poetry. This is when we're going to see a change in the motivation of our hero. Dactylic hexameter is going to be the meter that our poem is read to. Homer used it. Other epic poets used it. Some of the major poets who didn't write epic also used this. We're going to go into this later, but every line in the Aeneid will be read to this meter, or some variation of it. speech making. We are not going to have a conversation in the Aeneid where it's one line, then somebody else speaks, and then another speech, and then another one. Instead, our hero's speeches and all the character speeches are going to go on for probably a page or more. They're not very fond of the one-line speeches or one-line conversation. We're also going to have very elaborate descriptions of things between people and places. And the more important the longer the description is, the more important the object is. And we call this elaborate description an ekphrasis. Xenia is the ancient concept of hospitality. And hospitality was extremely important to Jupiter. In our epics, we're going to see this concept of xenia. When Aeneas eventually lands at Carthage, the xenia is very important because without the hospitality from Dido, Aeneas would not have been able to land in Carthage, and the events would not have spiraled from there. When Aeneas eventually gets to Latinus, his land, his hospitality towards Aeneas is also going to be very important. It's important to note, too, that the Trojan War itself is a violation of this xenia because Helen was stolen by the Trojans. They violated the hospitality that was given to them by the Greeks. And so therefore the Greeks were forced to retaliate because of this violation.